Hey kids, howdy and welcome once again for this week's episode of Conscious Embodiment, Astrology, and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. We are rounding out May and entering June. May 27th through June 2nd is the focus of this podcast. And as ever, we will start with a question. This is from Palin. I think I'm pronouncing this correct, P-E-L-I-N. Hello, Palin. If I'm mispronouncing your name, my apologies. Palin writes, "Hi, Dr. Lennox. I listen to your Red Robe Astrology every morning, and your podcast is Your podcast is an integral part of my Monday routine. I have an astrology question for you, and I was hoping you would answer on the podcast. I realize there are daily astrological transits, and their aspects within each other, that is like Mars trine Moon, etc. But transiting bodies also form aspects with our personal planets, our chart, such as transiting Mars trine our personal moon." She's using that as an example. "When interpreting a future date, which one takes priority? The transits du jour making aspects with each other, or the aspects they form with our birth chart placements? Thanks for your ever shining wisdom." This is a fabulous question. And on Instagram, I've been starting to do this thing with my stories. As often as I feel motivated to do it, I will chime in with a story to talk about different things that I'm experiencing in transits and illuminating a little bit more about how you might be experiencing them at the personal level. And I literally did a story just the other day about how that gorgeous interaction between Jupiter and the sun about a week or so ago was squaring my Leo sun. So I was talking for 2 days about how yummy the energy is and it's cash and prizes and we're going to feel abundant and prosperous. And I was miserable all weekend because that big gathering of Jupiter and Sun in Taurus was squaring my personal chart. So right there, Palin, is an example where something might be very vibrantly true about the general astrology, and it might not land for an individual at all in the way I might say that it would be generally understood because of this specific way that a lovely day out there might be hitting you or you or you very nicely and you in a very difficult way. So, the Red Robe Astrology and the general astrology of the day that I do in my daily Astro Alert subscription and the videos that are based on those emails that I do every morning, that's like the weather. It's raining today, bring a raincoat. And so it's the general energy that all of us are experiencing. And if you knew your chart well, you would always prioritize what's hitting your personal chart, because it might be raining across the United States, but it might be storming where you live and drizzling where someone else lives, right? So the rain is the general, but whether it's a storm or a sudden shower would depend on how it's dialing into your natal chart.
I like that analogy. Michael, is there also an analogy of, well, actually, I'm a cold weather person, and you're a sunshine person? Like,
well,
you prefer...
let me say this and see if this fits that. Well, actually, yes, it's actually fascinating because, for example, a transit that might hit somebody when they're in their 40s might be something they can learn from and grow with, where the same energy when they were younger might have knocked them on their ass. Right? So we're not the same person throughout life. And to your point, one person will feel an abrasive energy and make something with it because they're good at that. And someone else might feel the same abrasive energy and be like, yeah, I got to stay in bed all day. So your point, I think, is accurate as well. And the final point I will make is something that I've learned about my experience with astrology that I think might be universal. I can't know if it's universal, but here's something that I've noticed. The older I get, and therefore the wiser and the more integrated and healed that I get, the more directly I feel the general transits.
Oh.
Yes, because if my insides are more open and spacious and clean because of healing wounds and integrating and looking at shadow and knowing who I am, and I'm 60 now and I'm not as, I've grown in age and
Yes.
wisdom over the years, the more integrated I am, the more I'm going to feel the external transits as a direct experience because I'm better at receiving my personal energy from a grounded, centered, open place.
Huh.
That's my best language for this today. I've never described this experience. I've never said this out loud to anybody, but that is something I absolutely experience. The older I get, the more what I write about is what I'm going to experience, tempered by the fact that the transits to the natal chart will always trump the general transit. Hope that helps, Palin. Thanks for the question. So mostly what we're going to talk about today is just Jupiter. Jupiter just moved into Gemini. We talked about this in last week's podcast because it was slated to happen at the end of the week, which it did. But then I promised we would talk about it again in this week's pod because I want to talk about Jupiter's transit through Gemini, what the structure is, what it means for us, and how to get ready to receive the blessing. Jupiter is a social planet paired up with Saturn. The two of them create our social experience. I hate the word social planet because it makes it sound like we're talking about social life or socializing. But really,
Right.
we're talking about the two planets whose energy describes what happens in our communal world. Even if you look at the solar system, you got the personal planets very near the sun and the outer planets very far away. And then in this middle band, you have Jupiter and Saturn. They literally are in between the personal and the outer. So they reflect what happens in between us as personal bodied individuals and our higher selves represented by, Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto. And then Jupiter and Saturn create everything we experience together in a collective, as a part of a community. And within our own personal experience, Jupiter brings manifestation, bounty, abundance, expansion. The laws of attraction use Jupiter to draw to us all that we desire. The benefit of Jupiter in Gemini is the connection to Mercury that anything moving through Gemini has. Mercury is about mind and perception, and you cannot create anything in the world of abundance unless you can first have a mental equivalent of it. And so Jupiter in Gemini is all about the mental equivalence of all the desires we have for expansion and growth. Gemini is also about connection with community. So Jupiter in Gemini signals a time when connection and community and intellectual curiosity are highlighted. Our opportunities to grow are sort of rooted in communication, the exchange of ideas, our personal sense of intelligence, and being mentally adventurous, ready and willing to learn, being open-minded and seeing both sides of things as a expansive idea. So everything from the neck up gets to have access to how we create abundance with Jupiter in Gemini.
And this builds nicely off last week's opportunity for abundance as well, right?
Yes, what we had last week was the Sagittarius full moon ruled by Jupiter,
Yeah.
while Jupiter was still in Taurus. So Jupiter in Taurus is saying, you can have all the cash and prizes you want, but what's going to stop you from having them or creating them? In some ways, what Jupiter is saying, your mind, your perception, your thoughts. So we have a full moon with Jupiter at the anaretic degree of Taurus saying cash and prizes are possible. You got to let go of some shit. Sun in Gemini, Sagittarius, full moon, we were releasing lower thoughts so that we could have a juicier, higher thought experience. And a juicy, higher thought experience is also described by Jupiter in Gemini.
Right on.
I'll throw this in there that we always have to look at the shadow of Jupiter, which is always going to be over the top or extra. Jupiter amplifies, and when we like what Jupiter is amplifying, that's good, but we don't like what Jupiter is amplifying, that's not so good. And Jupiter in Gemini can amplify things like lack of follow through, too many ideas without a plan, things like gossip and low vibe communication, feeling expansive when they're really not, indecision, a fickle approach to what you want to create. So anxiety and monkey mind can get bigger with Jupiter in Gemini. So we always want to make sure that we're acknowledging the shadow of any planet. Jupiter will stay in Gemini for just over a year between now and June 9th of 2025. So we got about 13 months of Jupiter in this sign. So you want to pay attention to a couple of things as you consider what Jupiter's going to be doing in the year ahead. One is, if you don't know your chart, at least find out what house in your chart is ruled by Gemini, because that's the house that will be most lit up for the next 12 months, 13 months, in terms of abundance, prosperity, and expansion. But of course, the real yummy of any Jupiter cycle is the retrograde that he'll make. Jupiter's one planet where we want him to go retrograde, right? Because retrograde motion with Jupiter means that whatever he's going to deliver 3 times. So how you know if that's going to hit you is you want to look to your chart for anything that lives between 11 and 21 degrees. That's the retrograde posture of Jupiter in Gemini. He's going to go retrograde at the beginning of October through the beginning of February. So that's the retrograde time frame. And all year long, because of that retrograde in the fall through winter, any planets that you have in your chart, planets or points, so that means angles too, between 11 and 21 of any sign is going to be making triple transit contact with Jupiter, the great expander. So that can help you use your chart to navigate exactly how Jupiter's going to hit you while he transits through Gemini, which makes the question that I answered today even more fascinating, because really, Jupiter in Gemini is the weather report where we're all going to be expanding from the intellect for the next 12, 13 months. But if you look at what planets or points in your chart are in between 11 and 21, and you can do the math to see what the angles are, now you're cooking with gas, figuring out how Jupiter's going to hit you personally as well. So it's an interesting week for Jupiter's ingress into Gemini, because there's a transit that he's going to hit on Sunday, June 2nd. And that transit is a juicy, yummy trine with Pluto. So Jupiter in the air sign of Gemini in a harmonious triangle with the Lord of the Underworld there in Aquarius, helping us change and transform everything that we need to change and transform in order to move more powerfully into the 20 years of Aquarius energy that Jupiter is inviting us to. And Jupiter's change of signs does mean a new style of how we approach expansion and abundance. So it's actually a blessing that the first transit that Jupiter and Gemini makes is a triangle, a trine with the Lord of the Underworld, the death rebirth planet that can say, anything you need to change in order to manifest more powerfully is happening with ease and grace right now. And it allows us over the weekend, if you want to do a little manifestation ritual, doing such a thing on Sunday when the planet of abundance is trining the planet of death and rebirth is a wonderful sort of way to orient yourself into using words and writing and journaling and intellectual tools to lean into what you desire to create for yourself in the year to come. So outside of Jupiter's ingress and the trine between Jupiter and Pluto on Sunday, it's a pretty quiet week. Our next lunation is the 6th. We have our next new moon. The full moon is, behind us. So it's a quieter week. So I'm going to give a little highlight of like the 3 days this week where there's a little bit of juicy action, just to kind of give a forecast for the week in a way that, because I have the time and there's not other things to talk about. And so right here today, Monday, May 27th, we're actually in an interesting moment to speak powerfully into wounded spaces. Mercury's in a sextile with Saturn today, so mind is moving slow enough to have sort of cogent experiences of what's the lesson, what do we need to learn, what are we working on, all the sort of Saturn lesson-y things is possible today. Mercury's in Taurus, so we are also coming from love in our communication, but also guided by the heart. So, great day for a conversation in general, but with the sun in a semi-square with Chiron, the wounds are barking. So, it's a good day to speak into the healing of the wound experiences that you're sort of grappling with at the moment. Then on Wednesday, the sort of healing sensibility continues. Mars is conjunct Chiron on Wednesday, May 29th. So these are all the players that were in Aries during the Mercury retrograde cycle and the eclipse season with that Aries new moon. Chiron was part of that in a very big way. If you remember, the new moon in Aries was directly conjunct Chiron.
I remember that, yeah.
Well, yes, and it was a painful, potentially, and healing lunar cycle. So Mars has moved far enough to conjunct with Chiron on Wednesday, while Venus, so here's my sort of Venus report, right, that I do every week. Venus will semi-square them both on Wednesday. So that means the body, Mars in Aries, is in the midst of the healing process, and the emotional body and the relationship point will be agitating us. So you can expect some hurt feelings that might need to be worked through, especially if you're in any kind of a relationship narrative that needs some attention. And then the very next day, and this will be felt on Wednesday as well a little bit, is Mercury will then conjunct Uranus. That's sudden awareness, sudden insights, paradigm shifts, the dropping in of an idea that might be needed. And if the week is about some healing, the ideas that might rise up on Thursday might come from the contemplations that you move through Monday and Wednesday around healings in the heart. It's a fairly quiet week, which we could really use right about now. We do have their next lunation and our new lunar cycle starting next week, and we'll talk all about that in next week's episode. But meanwhile, enjoy Jupiter and Gemini, kids, and have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show.
This week we have a call-in dreamer. Hey Jennifer, what you dreaming?
Hi, thanks for having me. So, the dream is I'm outside somewhere and I'm kind of spying on two giraffes.
Oh.
So, I'm watching them and I don't know that they can see me, and then all of a sudden one of the giraffes looks right at me. And so somehow I become very afraid right away, knowing that if the giraffe saw me, it was going to start chasing me. So when it saw me, I started running and it started chasing me. And then the other giraffe that was with it started after too. So now I'm being chased by two giraffes. And I look down and I notice I'm holding a baby, like a 1 or 2 year old baby in my arms. And I look back and the giraffe is like right behind me and his foot is up, getting ready to come down on me. So I just stopped because I figured I was about to get trampled. And
Yeah.
so I just lay down on the ground and cover the baby with my body, just not sure what's about to happen. But the giraffe stepped over us. So everything was okay. But then so the giraffe kept going, but then it circled back around and came back, and I'm just laying there still. And the giraffe fell to the ground, which was kind of a big deal because it's so tall. It
Yeah.
just collapsed right next to me. And so it's kind of on its back now, writhing around, and it's wailing and crying and screaming and making all kinds of wild sounds and basically just wailing. So then I go over with the baby still in my arms and I start like petting the giraffe and trying to help it and calm it down
Yeah.
and soothe it and just find out, what I can do to help.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
That's the dream?
that's the dream.
Okie dokie. So let's start with the animal medicine itself, because clearly this is an animal medicine dream. And what do we know about giraffes? They have the sort of highest vantage point of any animal because of that long neck and how high up they are. Do you have, outside of the dream storyline, what do you make of giraffe medicine? What do you imagine might be the message of giraffe? Again, outside of the context of your dream, just give me a few felt thoughts about giraffe and giraffe medicine.
Well, I had that dream the first night of the voice class.
Oh, so you took my class, Finding Your Voice.
Yes, and that very first class, that night, I had that dream.
Okay. So if you were about to do a process where you were going to investigate ways in which your expression in the world is inhibited somehow, maybe by past traumas, etc., which is what that class is designed for,
Yeah.
what about that unfolding consciousness of you trying to grow into a greater expression that you own with your voice that's about 1 to 2 years old?
I don't know, Michael.
Okay.
I don't know what that meant.
Well, no, what I'm asking for, honey, is what can you tell us about your journey of self-investigation and unfolding that's about a year or two old? Like, what have you been working on for the last year or two? Because to me, the baby
Oh.
represents a consciousness that's about a year or two old. So a new way of you
Oh.
operating. And because you shared that this happened before you were doing a deep class, I'm making an association with that process. That's what I'm asking you because I think the baby represents that.
Okay. Well, I've been doing a lot of inner work in the past year,
Okay.
like a lot.
Okay.
I just found out a year ago that I'm autistic.
Oh. Now, that's a fascinating new identity to have to grapple with. So
Yes.
let's just go to that for a second. Let's just go straight to that. You have a new identity that's an outrageous thing you have to accommodate to. Brand new way of contextualizing who you are. That's the baby. That's a year or two old that
Yeah.
you're holding and caring for. It's your new consciousness. Now, the medicine of the giraffe, this dream is unfolding the way many medicine dreams unfold, where people are initially afraid of the figure that shows up. In my world, if an animal shows up in a dream, they are medicine, no matter what the dream says. And if you're terrified of the medicine, that's just a natural human response to a new sort of power that might be a little frightening to you. And it's a little bit about visioning the future, seeing what comes next, being able to see further about what's coming, but in a brand new way that also has to include, oh, I've got to think about who I am in a complete new way. So your first instinct is to run from the medicine. We all do that. We all run from our power. But the dream story tells us this is not something to run from, and it plays out that way. Right? In fact,
Yeah.
there's a circling back and there's a definitive connection says we're gonna connect. When push came to shove, you stopped. That's your psyche saying, oh, wait a minute, I'm receiving something here. I'm going to protect the new consciousness. And then the giraffes do all of the stuff that it does in the dream, which is really just to nurturingly wake you up to a new way of perceiving your future, your intuitive guidance forward, while understanding you're learning how to be a new kind of version of you that's about a year or two old.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
What can you give us a little 30-second what it's been like to accommodate this brand new idea of yourself after having decades in a body and knowing who
Yeah.
you are without that new information?
Yes. It's been very challenging, but also a huge relief. A huge relief.
Yeah, okay, I'll bet.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
bet.
Because I've always not known what all, I've always been different and weird and
This gives a new context then perhaps to the differentness and the weirdness. But what I love about what the dream is saying to you or offering to you is a new version of how to see your future from an organic place that's new. Make
okay.
sense?
Yes,
All
yes. I
right.
guess, to some degree I've always been kind of scared of who I am because it was so different, and maybe
Yeah.
maybe I'm not anymore.
Yeah, maybe this is an opportunity. This chapter is an integration chapter where you're getting interesting, disowned previous information and looking at it and saying, okay, I'll work with this, try to figure out what this means and incorporate it into your current sense of self. And I
Yeah.
think this dream is hopeful for that process.
Thank you. That's
Well,
great.
thank you. Thank you for sharing this.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the Daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.